So what I thought I would do with my presentation, since we're coming to the close of one funding cycle with the National Science Foundation, is to take a look back at the conferences, previous conferences. I know many of you are new and haven't come to these conferences before. There are some regulars, but look back, see some of the things we've covered, talk a little bit about the story of, which we've already talked a little bit about, but why rice paddies here at this farm. And I tried to put in references to the presentations or the proceedings from previous conferences or the speakers. Some of them are here, so that you can direct, if you have more interest, you can go to those resources. Because there's no way I can cover everything we've done in the last 4 years in a short presentation. But just to reflect a little bit about the last few years and what we've done. So these are just some of the topics I'll just go over. Talk about the paddies here, some of the issues that we've been already talking about short season, cold tolerant varieties that are necessary for this climate, water management, and some of the issues related to that, which are connected to wildlife that are important to my parents here at this farm. And then talk a little bit about the Northeast growers and what that means and what we might think about for the future. So these are the paddies here. I think this is a photo taken back in 2011, but it's a good photo because you can look down, you're kind of looking down at the paddies. And it's a whole system, 3 paddies and a pond or reservoir above to collect the water, hold it, and distribute it among the paddies as needed. We could continue. We've talked a little bit about this, I think, but one of the key reasons why my parents decided to do rice here was because they had a wet section in their farm that they couldn't use for other crops. You can see, so there's a drain. Whenever you dug in the soil, water collected, and they were thinking that this would be maybe a good place to grow something like rice. And my father had experience growing rice when he lived in Japan, so he had a little bit of background knowledge, also knowledge that rice was being grown in Hokkaido, Japan, which is the northernmost island with similar latitude to where we are in New England. So he was thinking, this could be a possibility, a way to use this land that we have a lot of in the Northeast, that, edges of cornfields, whatever, that aren't very productive, and rice can be very productive in this environment. So this is a picture of the first rice paddy. He started in 2006, so the summer before, it was basically just a dry field. It'd get really wet in the spring, and maybe depending upon how much rainfall we got in the fall, and he just dug, I think by hand, the first paddy, and planted a variety called koshihikari, which is a very popular sushi rice grown in Northern California and mainland Japan. And he just wanted to try and see if it would work. And what he found out that first year was it grew really well, but it didn't flower. So he didn't get any harvestable grain from that first crop. And I think this is where, that winter, he contacted Susan, talked again, and was able to get a few varieties of temperate japonicas. So varieties from Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, that are cold tolerant, early maturing. And that year in 2007, he actually harvested his first crop of rice. And I think in the front here, that's Dvorskin. Is that the tall one in the front? So you got some seed. He got some seed from Christian Elwell, who I will talk about a little bit. But Dvorskin, which is another variety, a Ukrainian variety, seems to be doing very well in this climate, and it's become pretty popular through different seed exchanges. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so some Hokkaido varieties and Dvorskin in that. So from those first few years, he began to understand that we really needed, the variety was really important in this environment. And over the years, since 2007, he's trialed, I think, over 100 varieties, getting seed from sources that Susan talked about in the US through the USDA. Some, like the Dvorskin, originally came from Cornell University many years ago, and then a panel of seed that we were able to import through Susan from Erie of Chinese varieties, which are displayed in the paddy today. So I'll talk more about those. So the USDA sources from Idaho and Arkansas, he was planting in 2008, 2009, and those varieties, I think in those 2 years he planted over 60 varieties, 30 each year. And the information about that is available on our website under the Northeast SARE grant reports. So this was funded by Northeast SARE, but it's information that might be useful to some of you who are starting out and want to know what varieties are out there and that are available through national sources. Okay, so we'll continue on. And then, so Dvorsky, I wanted to talk a little bit about because it's a variety that Christian Elwell, he's the owner of South River Miso in Conway, Mass. And he, in the 80s, wanted to grow rice and connected with a professor at Cornell University, John Peverly, and he gave him the seed for Dvorskian, what he called Dvorskian, I should say, because we think it might be called originally something else. We don't really know, but at that time it was called Dvorskian, and he shared this short grain Ukrainian variety as a really long on, which Susan was talking about, the whisker at the end, and you can see at the end of the grain, and you can see that in the field today. It's very beautiful, but you run into issues with post-harvest handling with that variety because of the long on. But at this time, Dvorskian is being sold through Fedco Seeds, which is a company in Maine, and there's a woman there growing Dvorskian in that environment. And her description of Dvorskian is saying it grows between 20 and 24 inches high, which is quite short. And if you look out in the field here today, that Dvorskian is much higher. And Christian had experience with it growing much higher, and other people have as well. So this photo is a picture of a panel of Dvorskian or Dvorskian maybe related strains from various places in the Northeast to plant together because we wanted to see if they were actually different, or maybe it's just an environmental relationship, which maybe Diane, she's not here, Diane might talk a little bit more about how maybe it's something to do about how the plant is reacting to the environment because it's growing much taller than it is in Maine. But this, I think this is a strain that my father has been growing since 2007 or 2006 when he got seed from Christian. There is the strain from Fedco Seeds. We actually purchased the seed from there to see if it was different. And then over here is a variety that we got from Anna McClung in Arkansas, which she's calling Dvorski 129. Which looks very similar, so maybe we can do the genetics and see if it's accurate. But it looks, if it is pretty similar and it seems to be flowering at the same time, then that's a source of seed because that we can that we can get from Anna. Maybe if people want that, we could make that available. And then in the far right is what we're calling Dvorskian South River, which is the strain that Christian has been growing for the last 30 years in Conway. Okay. So we were very lucky to have a visitor in at the 2011 conference, the head of the Erie Genetic Resources Center. And through that person, he came here, he saw the group, he got to see the paddies and see many of the varieties that he works with and maintains in their bank in the Philippines, and was very excited about that. And so we thought we don't have a lot of Chinese varieties, and there must be some that are cold tolerant, able to grow in this climate. We talked to him about importing some of those, and through the relationship with Susan, we were able to do that. So in 2012, at the end of the year, we were able to import, 80 plus varieties, high elevation, greater than 1,900 meters, and some northern Chinese varieties. And then in 2013, Susan in her greenhouse, because she is a quarantine facility, she grew them out for us, and they did an initial screening, I guess, so the earliest ones, they harvested seed from 47 of those varieties. And then today we have these 47 varieties grown out in the paddies out back. So we handed out a map of the paddies so you guys could see where all these different displays are. And there are the 10 high altitude varieties and 37 northern China varieties. And you can see many of them are flowering. They look beautiful today. I was here 2 weeks ago and maybe half of the northern China varieties were flowering, and now most of them are. And they have all different characteristics, which, you know, Susan was alluding to, screening for those characteristics. So a lot of them have different colored awns, different lengths, different grain colors, different leaf colors. It's really interesting to see that genetic resource we now have through Susan's help and Erie and our relationship with Erie, we have here now, and we can, you know, whatever interest we have, we can maybe work on those varieties. Okay. And then the final resource for seed is this ongoing project we are doing with Susan, and Sandy will talk more about this, is the breeding we're doing. And they took a variety that does really well here, a cold-tolerant variety from Hokkaido, Yuki Hikari, and they used it as the cold-tolerant base to breed in maybe aroma, maybe purple pericarp, which is the grain brand color, and then maybe long grain. And this photo, it's a little hard to tell, but you can see out in the field what it looks like. These are the parents of the breeding. So in the middle is Yuki Hikari, and I took this a couple weeks ago, or my father took this a couple weeks ago. And at that time, it was starting to head already. And then the parents on either side, this is the purple pericarp parent, and then on the other right side is the aroma parent. And you can see they're growing really nicely, but they have no intention of flowering in this climate. So this is why it's really great to have the greenhouses at Cornell, where they can plant the different varieties in a way so that they'll flower at the same time, so they can actually do the crosses in the greenhouse, which we could never do here in a field in the Northeast. And hopefully through this, and maybe through the help of some grow outs or participation from some of you other growers, we can develop some new varieties with some interesting characteristics for this climate. Okay, and then maybe a final source. I added this slide because last year I talked a little bit about saving seed. Many of you have been distributing seed amongst ourselves, and since we don't really have a commercial source of seed, I mean, you can get Dvorskin from Fedco Seeds, and you can get, if you live in maybe the southern Northeast, you could grow some of the Northern California varieties, so you could get them from there. But there isn't really a source for these cold-tolerant varieties. And we've been saving seed amongst ourselves and distributing amongst ourselves. So if you're interested in how to do that, maybe in a way that we are preventing the spread of disease or pests, or so that you can provide high-quality seed to get good yields, there's a presentation about that in the last conference. All right. So some of the common traits, we've talked a lot about cold tolerance. One of the other things that has come up a lot in the presentations, I spent a lot of time looking at all the presentations and the proceedings, and we've talked a lot about this in prior conferences, so I thought it might be good to just conclude some of the things related to it. That is that rice generally, in a lot of the tropical varieties are like this, let me see if I can explain this correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't flower until day length gets shorter than 12 hours. So the time between sunrise and sunset gets shorter than 12 hours. And here, of course, in our growing season, day length is much longer. So those varieties would never flower here, which we have found. So what they have found with some of the temperate, and especially the temperate japonicas, is that they have bred out that sensitivity to photoperiod. And these varieties are more photoperiod insensitive, but they're sensitive to temperature extremes. So some of you, through your experiences, may have found this, that when it gets too hot in the early vegetative stages, it starts to head or flower prematurely. Also, and then I'll continue, I think the next slide, we'll talk about during the reproductive phase, if it's too cold at night, which can sometimes happen during the reproductive phase of plant growth or rice growth, it can cause sterility in the panicle or in the seeds. And also temperatures too high will do the same thing. So you will get, it will look like the panicles are developing, but they will all be empty pretty much. So one of the things, I think we can continue on. One of the things we've found here in our climate is water can help mediate temperature a little bit. So water can provide a heat holding medium so that in May and June, when you have these little small seedlings in the paddies, and you get a cold night, you could maybe bring in a little more water during the day. It can warm up, and it could provide a little bit of a thermal bubble maybe around the seedlings so that they don't get any damage from the cold. That's fine. This can also be useful. I've heard some farmers and some that have been participating in our rice variety trials that they had some severe weather in May and June when their seedlings are very small, and now they don't have any rice plants left because of hail or strong winds. And water can help. It's unrelated to the sensitivity issue, but water could help with that as well. Maybe raising the water provides a little buffer. These seedlings are very tolerant to a little bit of rise and fall, daily rise and fall. So it can provide a little buffer or protection for severe weather, high winds, high cold winds, those kind of things. Okay. And then a little note about warm versus cold water. So one of the reasons why here at this farm they created this pond or reservoir to hold the water is to warm it up. So warm water will have a positive effect on how the rice plant develops versus cold water. So I think my father found this out pretty clearly this year. And the furthest paddy, and I don't know if it's this obvious, but 2 weeks ago it was pretty obvious to me that he had used water straight from the stream to water that far paddy. And right around where that water entered, there's an area where it looked to be maybe a week or more behind developmentally than the other areas where the warmer water had been used. So this can have, we're working in such a marginal climate that these little things can have a big influence on how quickly your plants develop, whether or not they will mature within the season we have. And this has already been talked about, weeds. So just a benefit of having a flooded paddy is it helps a lot with weeds. If you're growing in dry land or aerobic conditions, you have the added task of dealing with weed management. And because we're talking about water and using water, this is a slide, I think, from 2011 from my father's presentation. And there are many ways to deal with water, even if you're using a paddy environment, when you add water, when you let the paddies dry down. And some of these, here at this farm, they try to maintain water level, and I'll water in the paddies as much as possible, and I can explain in a minute why that is. But there's, like SRI, which is the system of rice intensification, and Lucy, you're over here, if you're interested more in that methodology, but they try to do a system of wetting and drying to help with their plant's growth. That's a strategy. None of these are right or wrong. You just kind of pick and choose what you're interested in, what you would like to develop. There was a gentleman back in 2011, I think, his name is Eric Andrus. He's in the Champlain Valley, and he was trying to do duck and rice. So there's different ways. If you have ducks in your rice paddies, then you need water at certain times as well. So these are just different methods of using water in your paddies. And it's related also to wildlife. And we'll continue on. So what they have found here is that when they made these paddies, all of a sudden a dry field, a pasture, a hayfield, became a whole different environment. And they started getting these animals that they never had before, frogs, turtles, insects like dragonflies and damselflies, birds, shore birds that they never had, or wetland birds. And so there became issues kind of with how they manage their paddies in relation to how the life cycles of these, especially the amphibians and the dragonflies, how they develop, because they're using this paddy now as their home, and they're coming in the spring, laying their eggs, especially the frogs, salamanders, that type of thing, and their life cycles don't always coincide with what you want to do with your paddy to grow rice. And so here at the farm, they try to maintain water in the paddies as much as possible to help with allowing a lot of the frogs and amphibians lay their eggs, develop and mature, and leave before they need to dry it down for whatever reason. And if you go out to the paddies today, you may actually see the great tree frog is kind of like the token amphibian, I guess, for the rice paddies in the Northeast, because it's such a charismatic creature, I guess, and especially Christian Elwell at South River. So I don't remember, I think maybe 2009 or 2011, he talked about his relationship with his paddies and how it has changed, because he's been growing Dvorsky for a long time, but it's been dry land. And then in the last several years, he's done paddy with Dvorsky and seen the great tree frog come and hearing it. So there's an adult, it's kind of gray. It only stays in the trees for most of its life cycle, but it comes to these wet areas to breed. And so you might see a few of those little ones emerging. We saw some yesterday, but they'll be they're small, very small, tiny little things on the rice plants. And then the dragonflies, a lot of them will mature within the rice growing season, so we don't have to worry. The ones we have to worry about are the frogs that need more than one season for the tadpoles to develop and mature, which are like the green frogs, or not green frogs, bullfrogs and some of the other ones that need more. So presentations about wildlife we focused on in 2011, I believe. So there's presentations from Jim Andrews, who's the herpetologist for Vermont, and Mike Blust, who works a lot with dragonflies. So if you're interested in the wildlife aspect, we focused that conference on the wildlife, so you can go back and check those out. Okay. So a lot of us have been talking about the Northeast rice grower is not one single thing, and there are many scales of rice growing in the Northeast. There are many ways of doing it, and in 2012, we had some growers come and talk about what they're doing, some who had some experience. And I thought I would go through and show some images, because some of them are very different from what it looks like here, but it's still growing rice in the Northeast. And for those of you who are interested in starting, you can try to, kind of visualize what your options are and what you might want to do for your area. Okay. So this is the gentleman I was talking about in the Champlain Valley. He's in Vergennes, and he has very flat, clay-rich soils, wet soils, and I think in 2011, he came and he talked about trying to do ducks with rice. And I don't know how much he's continued that, but he has lots of land, lots of wet land, and he's growing rice at a pretty large scale for the Northeast. So this is Christian Elwell's place, his paddy, his Dvorskian. I added him because his paddy is very aesthetically pleasing. But his Dvorskian has been a source of seed for many growers in the Northeast as well. And then this I added, Jenny isn't here today, but she was growing rice at 1,500 feet, so very high altitude paddy rice in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. So she had success with that. So it can be grown in different areas. And then this is Josh Brill. This is around Rutland, Vermont, if you're familiar. He's, I think, pretty high altitude as well, but on a steep slope. So I think somebody mentioned interest in doing terraced. He has a terraced 3 paddies on the hillside there. And Sean and Alicia, they are owners of Rhapsody Foods, if you're familiar with that, in Tempe in Vermont. But they have been growing rice as well. I think pretty high elevation as well, paddy rice. And then Rhode Island, Paul Kyle, he's growing a few paddies as well in a kind of shaded, cooler climate. So although it's further south than we are, maybe he's still dealing with cold issues because of the spot where he is. And then Michael, you're here, and Ryan. So this is their dry land aerobic rice. You can actually see the corn in the back there, but a wet part of the field, saturated soils, but they're trying to grow without irrigation. And then Jim, and Jim's over here. So his operation is in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. He's growing rice dry land, kind of like another crop. So he's in raised beds, and it's kind of an interesting way of looking at rice in the Northeast. And then a aspect of growing rice that I'm really interested personally, because I have a lot of background in environmental education, is growing rice and connecting that to education. So I'm very happy that today we're going to have the group from Randall's Island talk about that aspect, because we can grow rice as much as we want, but if we don't connect it with the consumer, we're never going to have a market for local rice. And for many of us, it's important to grow for our local community. We're never going to compete with Arkansas or California. So our market for rice is this local foods movement, people who want local grains for their lifestyle. And I just learned about this a few weeks ago. So we have a group from Martha's Vineyard who, through funding and support from Glenn, are doing a farm-to-school program where they're growing rice. So that's very exciting to hear about. So yeah, it's important to connect, not only where our food comes from, but who's eating it. Oops. Oh, so we have, yeah, that's the right one. It's slow because there's a lot of photos, but we have always tried to add this component to our conferences, and we actually focused on it, I think in 2012 as well. We had a morning of presentations kind of talking about rice cuisine internationally and how that connects to growing rice. But we always, with our lunches, we always focus on rice. We like to connect that aspect because, as you said, it's important to grow rice, but it's also important to find that market to eat the rice. And then work we're doing now that Susan alluded to is developing our own climate and our agronomic data. And I was very fortunate to have one of Susan's graduate students, Kristen Diepenbrock. She put together an explanation, which we recently posted on the website, about growing degree days and what it is, what it means, how we're hoping to use that tool for the Northeast. And this is the page, and the map down here, I think we can click and it will be the map. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Well, the map is something that has been developed, and I think I'll talk about it. We can continue on. So this is a slide from prior presentations. I think where this idea started, my father started thinking about, we get lots of questions about what varieties do well. In the beginning we did, and we still do, and try to connect that with climate. So we tried to do that with growing degrees days, which is what the definition at the bottom is. And we collected data at Akaogi Farm in 2009. So I don't think you can see it, but it's around 1,900 growing degree days in that year. Growing degree days, if you don't know, is the number of degrees Fahrenheit we're using above 50 within a given day accumulated over the growing season, which we did was May 1st to September 30th. And so it was 1,900 in 2009 here at the farm, and then a comparison of some of the locations throughout the Northeast. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, in Northern California, they're looking at growing degree days around 3,000, but they are 3,000, between 3,000 and 3,500, even in their coldest areas, which is a lot warmer than here.
But interestingly, Montreal is...
Yeah, so there's some places, yeah, in kind of around the lakes, around the St. Lawrence, that are, warm, pretty warm, and could be. And we've had some interest, from Canada for people who want to grow rice. Okay, so this is the map that I was talking about, and this is something that Genevieve put together, and another woman, Darcy, was very instrumental, and they collected climate data from weather stations. So these aren't actually growing places where we're growing rice. We hope to have a map with places where people are growing rice, but this is just climate data, what growing degree days look like in reference to rice here in the Northeast. And when we first put this together, it was very intriguing to me that you could, although maybe the color gradations are arbitrary, you can really see that there is, a range of climate here in the Northeast, and varieties that might grow well in the northern half are going to be different than the southern half. And the southern half might be able to grow some of the varieties from Northern California. Oh, and I'll just mention briefly, there is a blow-up of this map out displayed, so you can take a look at it later and during the break.
And you might mention where the information comes from. all satellite data.
Oh, okay. So it's all satellite. I don't know.
Genevieve, you want to mention where the information comes from?
I think it's actually from an entomology group at Oregon State that collected climate data from for 30 years.
It's satellite
weather
data.
Stations.
Yeah.
Weather stations.
Yeah, satellite data from weather stations and airports and things. So it's not necessarily on your farm. It's the nearest weather station to you.
Right. And so we hope to improve our data resource for the Northeast. And we have asked, in the last couple years, I guess we have been talking about having growers in the Northeast grow a panel of varieties. And I think a few of the people who are participating in this are in the audience. Maybe who's here? Who's participating in the variety trials? Yeah, Orion and Nick and and Zach. So there's a few of you here. Oh, and Andrew. So there's a few of you here in the audience who are participating in this, growing a panel of 4 varieties that range from what we think will be early maturing to late maturing in the Northeast, to see how they fare in different locations, and hopefully we can connect that with the temperature data and give, over years maybe, we can give some recommendations to the Northeast growers. And this is the panel we picked. Yuki Hikari Duborskin, because it's kind of popular in the Northeast because of availability. M102, which is an early maturing variety from Northern California, one of the earliest. And then Koshi Hikari, because it's a popular variety. So we have about 30 growers participating, which is more than I thought. We'll see how much data we get back, but okay, continue. Maybe it's taking a while because it's photos.
Sometimes it just has there.
Okay, so I just wanted to give some faces to the prior conferences, and these are the faces of the Northeast rice growers. And we started out in 2009 with a group maybe of, I don't know, maybe 40, and then it's grown a little bit. Last year we had a lot of people because we had some Asia Rice Foundation USA board of members were there, and we had a group from Burlington. So some larger groups that came along, but it's been nice to see this group grow, and different people, new people every year coming in, which is, this group may seem small, but there's a lot of people who have come in prior conferences who still keep in touch, and there are people who just reference the website and the videos there. And so I'll end with the website, which Susan talked a lot about. So this website, we hope, will be a resource for you into the future. And we don't know where the future will be, but hopefully we will all keep in touch and continue this project further.